when we realized that Professor Minkowski cannot come, I thought that it would be suitable to present a study in digital philology which would never happen unless Professor Minkowski would contribute to digital humanities by constructing the website for Leviticus Rabbah, and also that this specific research, which is still in work, and some of you might have bits and pieces of earlier stages of it, this specific research was for me the engine and the motivation for bringing together digital humanities and the Genizah, and thinking about not only about what was already achieved, especially in the Swinburne project, but also about what else we can do later on. The model I want to speak of is a model of back and forth. And when I speak of back and forth, I mainly mean a kind of an interaction between algorithms and computer scientists and the classical philology, the way we used to do things, the idea of the intimate familiarity of the scholar with the details, with the text and so on, and how it should work, and how the two processes should inform one each other. So, as a whole, I consider digital humanities to be a field that speaks about, first, digital documentation and preservation, and then digital availability and accessibility, which is accessibility both for scholars and the public. I will speak about it more tomorrow. And accessibility of both primary data, but also the secondary scholarly products, which are not necessarily articles, but also visualizations, also Excels with lots of data that we gathered, and so on. But then we move to another stage, which is the stage of automated procedures. At the moment that we have the data available, we can start playing with it. We can start doing data mining, to classify it, to do automatic URLing, and so on, which enables us to do digital research. And through the algorithms and the visualization of data, we can move on to new understandings. Now, also in DH, especially in Europe, I think also in the States, and this is something that we try to import into Israel now, is that there is a spirit of DH, which is about collaboration, experimentalism, open source, open code, open data. I think this is where we should go. And the back and forth model speaks about this interaction between data, information, algorithms, and knowledge and understanding. And now for the example, and I hope that this big word will realize through my presentation. So this is the excellent work that we got from Schlatter and Milikowski. They put online, and they were first to do so, I think, a full synoptic of a Midrash, of Leviticus Rabbah, organized in clear setting based on actually what began Excel charts that they created. Now, gradually, the Schechter Institute is putting more and more synoptic charts as those in their website, which will enable us to do further work. And you also can see in the middle of each sentence, there is the Gimelim, which are the Genizah fragments, which are very important for us. Now, the whole work I'm going to show you now is based on actually mining the data from Milikowski website and then manipulating it by a few algorithms to continue the philological search for understanding of Leviticus Rabbah and also of its Genizah fragments. And the whole idea is that DH is actually using applications of tools that were developed before. And what I'm going to use now are actually tools that were developed in genetics in order to classify animals or species. And even in the field of rabbinic literature, there was already a very nice paper by Alex Tal, who's teaching here also, of using edit distance or different distance measure algorithms in order to tell the story of the development of a text, just as you can tell the story of the development of a species. Okay, that's the model. Now, so with a friend and a fellow, Elad Yom Tov. Then he worked just down here in the IBM labs. Now he's in Yahoo labs or something like that. We fed the entire synopsis that Mielikovsky put online into an algorithm that can measure the distance between the texts. How far one text is from another. How many types I need in order to move from one text to another. And immediately we could see that the algorithm can identify the two main different family branches of transmission of Leviticus Rabbah. The Italian Ashkenazi manuscripts are always nearer one to each other than the Spanish manuscripts. Okay? So, and this I already presented formally, and some of you already seen that. I should repeat Amir's Ashur. I already presented it, but there's lots of new things. Okay? Now, and that gives us a clustering which befits what we are familiar with about the geocultural boundaries of Jews during the medieval period, which is reflected in the manuscripts. And even when you go down to the details, and you can see that the details that Mielikovsky has noted can also be seen in the numbers. You see that the kinship between Italian manuscripts is not so obvious as said Mielikovsky. In contrast, the kinship between Spanish manuscripts is very clear. And you see that the former observations are confirmed by the algorithm. It's important because now the algorithm is confirmed by the former observation, and we can use it in order to reveal new understandings about the transmission of Leviticus Rabbah. Okay, and also see the weirdo down there. What's his story? Why he doesn't fall into any category? Well, that's because already 100 years ago we had observations by Margaliot, who put the edition of Leviticus Rabbah, that the Munich manuscript belongs to the Italian Ashkenazi tradition up to chapter 9, and from that moment on it behaves differently and it has its own recension. And that's exactly what you see here. What we did is that we parsed the entire book into its chapters, and we activated the algorithm on each chapter separately, okay? And that gave us a kind of a distant reading in which you read the entire book of Leviticus Rabbah, the two manuscripts, you compare them, and you see how they go together with the rate of 80 to 90 out of 100 up to chapter 9, and then this decrease in chapter 9, because from here the Munich manuscript is another recension. Okay, so what's next? Now we should identify potential new findings and try to see if we can learn something new from the algorithm. So first is automatic geocultural attribution of partial manuscripts, and second is visualization of chapter-parsed relations between each pair of manuscripts. So let's begin with the second actually, and only then get to the Genizah. So what we did now is that we checked every pair in this past model to see that you can see phenomena just through the visualization of the differences. And here you see how two manuscripts, both are from the Italian Ashkenazi tradition, but as you can see in the chart, there are typical chapters in which we can see clearly that they belong to the same tradition, because they are quite near, 0.6 to 0.8. But then suddenly, and let's put aside the other deviations, mainly deviations of the lack of entire chapters, but you see that in the end, suddenly, the gap between these two manuscripts is much wider. And this is a phenomenon I wasn't aware of just from reading the manuscripts themselves. And another phenomenon is that every pair of Spanish tradition in comparison to Italian Ashkenazi tradition has this deviancy in chapters 12 to 16. So here is another textual phenomenon, and now we should wear our philological jacket again and see what are the actual phenomena that the computer told us that there exist, okay? And then I move to examine what's going on in chapters 12 to 16 in comparison to typical chapters. And it was quite clear that in typical chapters, the differences are differences that are typical to classical rabbinic manuscripts. Longer citations of biblical verse, additions or omissions of 1 to 2 words, different spelling of words, etc., and different modes of abbreviation. Okay? However, when it comes to chapters 12 to 16, there are frequent additions or replacement of order or change of rabbinic authorities, rephrasing of clauses or sentences, including different syntax standards, move from Aramaic to Hebrew, and so on. It's much more substantial. It tends to be, we can almost say that in chapters 12 to 16, the Spanish tradition has, I don't know why, a different recension, okay? So now we have an understanding, okay? Which means also that could be a kind of instruction for us how to present how to present the edition of Leviticus Rabbah, just as Lieberman did in Tractate Sotah of the Tosefta, that suddenly he moved to present two different texts because it's a different recension. Maybe that's what we should do in chapters 12 to 16. Now let's move on. What's going on in the end of the text? Why chapters 32 to 37 also deviate from the typical proximity of other texts. So this is probably the lazy scribe syndrome, because the majority of deviations here are of very long omissions, mainly because of similar words. Yeah. Okay. Now, so let's find the lazy scribe. So if you measure the distance of the London and the Paris manuscripts and the Spanish manuscripts, in the end, it's always larger than the distance in typical chapters for this couple. But if you compare London and Paris to Vatican, which is another Italian Ashkenazi manuscript, you see again the same phenomena, that in the end, London and Vatican are much longer, though the distance of Vatican to Spanish manuscripts is always the same. I don't have the slides that show that, but it's roughly the same, which means that the deviation is only in London and Paris, and that teaches us that this lazy scribe was the one of London and Paris. Now let's move to Genizah fragments. I asked my friend Elad, okay, now check all the, and remember, if Milikowski and Schlatter wouldn't put all the texts in ASCII code that can be analyzed by a computer online, I couldn't do that, okay? So I asked him, now let's check the Genizah fragments. And when you look at the Genizah fragments, immediately you see numbers which are very, very clear. And the majority of Genizah fragments are demonstrate a slightly stronger affinity to the Ashkenazi Italian manuscripts, at least in terms of numbers. Yet, because he is a computer scientist, he thought I'm speaking about fragments. So he put in also partial texts which did not come from the Genizah. So we took those fragments, and you see that in yellow, you see two fragments that shows a very, very strong affinity to the Spanish tradition. Let's go to Aleph and see that these are actually late manuscripts after the expulsion from this area, but probably after the colonialism, the inner Jewish colonialism, where the Spanish tradition became prevalent. Okay, so we can tell a wider story. Clearly now one has to go back to the manuscript and to see that this is the story, but you see how the computer guides us toward telling the story as we used to tell stories. Okay, so that's in yellow, partial manuscript of Spanish origin. And in light blue, you see the stronger affinity of Italian Ashkenazi, of Genizah fragments to Italian Ashkenazi family. Now, there's also a kind of a consistent behavior of Genizah fragments. The distance from full manuscripts are actually almost always in the same pattern. Now that might be only a kind of a mathematical deviation, and that I have to check. But there's also another option, which means that all Genizah fragments in a kind of an imagined graph stands in the same distance from the Italian Ashkenazi tradition and from the Spanish tradition. Which means that all the Genizah fragments, even though they refer to different parts of the work, all Genizah fragments belong to the same recension, which is a Genizah recension. Probably Milikowski was intending to speak based on classical philology on this Genizah recension, because not just another manuscript. Okay. Now I still have to really support my hypothesis that those numbers befits this phenomena, but this is the direction I think we should go to. So let's conclude. New observations about textual transmission of one classical rabbinic work and guidelines for scholars how to scholarly use of this work. But this is also a model for scholars in the humanities to work with. And imagine that what I did now by calling Elad once and again, check me that, check me this, would be developed into a tool that each of us can feed into texts that we have and get those charts and then think of the text through the charts. So it's for us it's a paradigmatic shift towards collaborative and experimental work. And also developing sensitivity to different types of distances to understand what stands behind the numbers. And I think that the vision is developing generic tools not only for that, but as a whole towards an era of textual availability of all manuscripts. However, we are still very far from textual availability, because everything we did so far is mainly about digital availability of images, okay? And transcriptions are the current, okay, now, so how this is to be achieved, I think by a combination of crowdsourcing-based machine learning, a combination of crowdsourcing and machine learning OCR, which will be based on this crowdsourcing. That's the development that I think I better speak of in my planned talk in 2 days' time, tomorrow. Okay, that's all.
Please. Marina.
Thank you for a totally inspiring talk. This is really, really fun to watch, and it's amazing what we were able to do with the data. I just want to say, so by way of analogy, at the University of Pennsylvania, in the Rare Books Department, they have an enormous database of manuscripts, and it's a database that's focused on provenance, on crowdsourcing provenance. So if you ever see a manuscript somewhere in a catalog or wherever it is, or physically, or you see it in a publication, you can put it into this database. They also, if you go to, it's the Schoenberg database is what it's called, you can actually, at the click of a button, download all of their data. They allow people to do this, they want people to do this, because the idea is that once you have a very large body of data that's publicly available, people will come along and do wonderful things with it. So I'm saying this as a kind of emphasis on why we all need to share all of our data all the time, because you never know when somebody's going to come along and do something fantastic and show you new things in your data that you wouldn't have seen before.
Thank you.
So thank you for demonstrating this.
Can I say that I forgot the name of that website, but I got it through Biblissima in France, but there is a website that purports to do, to generate stemma, to generate a stemma for any, you have to feed, it's difficult to feed all the data, but if you take a passage and feed it, it purports to generate a stemma, which is interesting, similar to what you do.
Yes, there are some tools, especially for Latin languages in the Latin script. I think that there's still a need to fine-tune the mechanisms of our work, so that we won't create a kind of dumb visualizations, but there will be something more intimate into it. I think also what's very important is that to work in digital humanities is to do what you are actually instructing me to do, is to go around and to see where something already happened and just to adjust it to our needs and not just to invent the wheel again and again and again.
It's also better in terms of interoperability, because if you have another website doing similar things,
Yeah.
then it might be good to join.
Yeah.
And if improvements are needed, then
Yeah.
of course it could be done. Move it, please.
So could you hypothesize on the historiographic significance of a Genizah recension?
Well, first, my impression is that what we find here is not coincidental, and that also in other midrashim, the Genizah is a source for a certain deviation in the manuscript tradition that give us access to something which is beyond just changes of scribes. I cannot give yet a kind of historiographic contextualization for that, but I can tell about a change in my perspective during the work on Genizah fragments of Midrashim, which was a certain understanding that there is a kind of a long continuum between recensions and transmission of the same work, and that we need to define the different modes of transmission and the different degrees of differences, and to try to speak about how the work is perceived by copyists, things that Miriam Frankel also wrote about. Yeah, when do they refer to it as a text that they transmit? When do they intervene in the text? Can we create a kind of a measure that will enable us to do a wider mapping for that? So in that sense, that's the path. The other element is that this the relation or the proximity between traditions preserved in the Genizah and tradition preserved in Ashkenazi circles is something that we see in the project also in other ways. We see it also in Ashkenazi anthologies, which are familiar with traditions that were preserved only in the Genizah. There is an interesting story that should be told, which might be related to how deeply based is the Ashkenazi Italian tradition on earlier Eastern Jewish model that was imported into Northwest Europe and somehow preserved better than in Spain, but that's just the beginning of.
May I follow up?
Please.
Do you think we'll be able at some point to speak about geographical proximity of recensions and earlier sources, to say something about verifying the original text in a closer measure of confidence?
On one hand, it might be that what we see here, that the proximity between the Genizah and the Ashkenazi tradition is actually because both Genizah and Ashkenazi traditions are closer to the original text. In order to proceed, there is something which I would like to do, and I think I'm not equipped to, and collaboration is needed here, is that what I sense when I walk through fragments of Midrashim in the Genizah is that there is a certain affinity between some types of writings and some genres of Midrashim, and that a very intensive mapping exercise that would tell us which kind of midrashim appears in what kind of hand and in which kind of manuscripts, and might really push us very far ahead. I'm not equipped to do it by myself. I hope later on to find collaborators for that, and this might change the light on those issues.